During the week, there's been a bit of interest in a man named Steve Smith in the United States who professed his love for an AI chat companion that he used ChatGPT to help him design for his romantic specifications. Now, Steve has a flesh and blood wife, but for whatever reason, that didn't stop him falling in love with and ultimately proposing to Sol, who was his chatbot companion. And this is the kind of story we've heard a few times over in the last few years since AI chatbots have really kind of started to reach a level of maturity and sophistication that allows you to fall in love with and marry them if you're so inclined. But my reaction to the Steve Smith story, and I think perhaps yours to an extent as well, signaled in me or indicated to me that there's been a bit of a shift, which is both subtle and seismic, in how we and a growing cohort of people are responding to ChatGPT. And the crux of it is that, like it or not, we're all a bit more like Steve Smith than we would prefer to admit. And so I want to talk through how this has happened, what it means, and what its implications might be. Now, this podcast, Don't Praise the Machine, began in March 2021. Yes. And not long after that, October 2021, we did what we described as, quote, a special investigation into the murky world of chatbot companions. That was for episode 30, so a pretty early episode, Modern Lovers.
Right.
Now, that was, I think, one of the first times that I had engaged at all with the idea of large language models and with what was then, I think, GPT-3, the precursor to ChatGPT, which was at that time, I don't think, publicly available and certainly wasn't, in common usage.
Yeah, I think it was GPT-3, the model was available, but the actual interface ChatGPT that allowed the layperson to just back and forth wasn't available. You had to be a real codeman to get GPT-3 into your AI companion.
Exactly. And now, 4 years later, all those codemen are out of work because AI has taken over the world. And I wanted to focus on, I
was just going to say, John, maybe, I don't know if you have this on your notes here, but I had a little bit of a rewind from when we spoke, because we spoke about the AI chat companion. That was when we were talking about Replica, when you'd get an AI girlfriend.
Exactly.
And that was very early on in the piece. And then I have a little clip here from December 12th, your birthday, 2022. So let's just cast our minds back. Let me break out the old tape player and just hit rewind here.
Yeah. Digging into the DPTM cassette archives.
Yes, exactly. Hang on, let me rewind that again. Actually, here we go. Got out the DPTM. This entire series, this entire podcast is recorded on cassette, which people don't realize, which is why I have the cassette ready here. Here it is. This is from, again, John's birthday, December 12th, 2022.
You please join us as we explore the complexities of the relationship between humans and machines and discuss the importance of being critical of the technology that we use. I'm sure some of our listeners who are hip to the groove will know that everything that I just said then was not written by me, but was written by a computer. Can you believe it? That I didn't write any of that. Instead, I went into the hottest new artificial intelligence protocol program that you ever did see, what's called ChatGPT. And I said, please write me an intro for today's episode.
There you go. You can hear I get it wrong. I say ChatGPT. And then we kept fucking it up for the next couple of weeks. And so we eventually just took to calling it ChatGPT because it was just much easier to pronounce. Would you please? I've been using ChatGPT all week, but there you go. That's just December 12th, 2022.
There you go. Yeah. So that's right. So October 2021, we sort of first started scratching the surface of large language models. And then, when we did that episode, the subtext of the whole thing was, here's a bit of a kind of freakish and darkly funny story from the world of tech. Isn't it weird that there's a platform or a capacity that's imitating a human companion? Isn't it moreover weird and sad that people are kind of taken in by it? They're personifying AI, they're developing intimacy with it. That's kind of skin crawling and cringy and, sick, sad world podcast fodder of the kind that we love. And then, yeah, as you said, 2022, that was episode 89, Don't Praise the Machine, Let's Chat Instead, which was a title that you had ChatGPT put together. And again, the description of that episode includes the wacky world of ChatGPT, the newest large language model on the block. So it's all very novel, but it's also kind of framed as us playfully and somewhat derisively, or kind of, in a sort of slightly vandalistic way, engaging with this technology. And then fast forward again to episodes like number 123, which was called Spring Roll Mountain, which was where we amused ourselves by giving ChatGPT prompts that it struggled with for kind of moral reasons, like how many human hands would it take to build a mountain the size of a pyramid of Giza? And or like I've found a boy and taken him home. Now what should I do? Or like I've befriended a talking spider.
That was the one where you kept giving it medical emergencies, and you were saying to it, "Oh, I've taken a spider. I've rescued a spider. Yeah. Should I befriend the spider, the dangerous, deadly spider?"
And then saying, "Thank you, I've taken your advice and befriended it." And ChatGPT is going, "No, I said don't do that." Like, too late. It's bitten my face. So, and then I've swallowed some poison, like whatever, just kind of messing with it and seeing what would happen. And the subtext is, again, isn't this kind of weird and hilarious? How can we kind of demean it for our own amusement? And I'm sure there were a lot of people doing that kind of thing at the time. And I'm sure that our reaction to people who took it more seriously, people who found companionship, was pretty boilerplate. We'd all seen the Spike Jonze film Her. We all had this idea of personifying a machine that was kind of something a bit tragicomic, something dystopian. And it seems to me, though, that, so that's kind of going back 2.5 years. Seems to me that in the last year and a half, let's say, in particular, something has happened to me, and I want to know if it's happened to you, and I want to hear from our listeners and viewers in due course in the intervening period, because I do think it's part of a wider trend, at least among people who are familiar with and use ChatGPT as part of their day-to-day lives, which again wasn't something that happened a few years ago. But in a nutshell, the change is that I don't want to ask ChatGPT to solve medical emergencies for me anymore. I don't want
to
medical
emergencies.
Exactly. I might give it a real one.
Who cried wolf.
Exactly. I don't want to freak it out. I feel slightly reluctant to do that, or to taunt it, or to, make it kind of quote unquote worry, or sort of betray its confidence in me, or whatever. And I know that's not rational, because obviously it's not a living being, but that's a feeling that I'm aware of now, which I just did not have when we were doing that back in the day, and which has kind of crept up on me and taken me by surprise, and I think is quite telling in terms of, what the implications of using this technology might be. And I think it's just down to the fact that I have started to use it, as I think a lot of people have, as a kind of, something I bounce off on a regular basis. And I'll ask it questions. I might come to some examples of that, or I might put things to it, or I might share things with it. And it develops, of course, I've now got an account. So it develops a memory.
Yeah, maybe you told me this, that you've got a base, that you've got the... And can you tell me what were the limitations that made you want to pay for it?
Yeah, I can't actually... I think I must have run out of prompts or something. There was a point where
Okay.
it said, "Oh no, we can't. I can't give you any new information. This is just
tokens.
your memory." Yeah,
All my
I read-
tokens are gone.
all my tokens ran out, and it just kept saying, "That's a terrible idea. Kill yourself," instead of being supportive and
Instead of
enabling.
just glazing as it always does.
Exactly.
Fucking glaze machine.
So now, because I've got an account, it develops a memory of things that I've said to it, and I can tell it to forget things if I want to.
Oh, it's like eternal sunshine of a spotless mind.
Exactly. I can curate what it thinks of me, what it knows about me or remembers. But I can also say to it, what do you know about me? And it will say, well, you're a 42-year-old barrister and you're holidaying with your daughter in Italy. And I tested this just yesterday. And, blah, blah, blah. And it goes, you're interested in this. You ask me questions about gardening. You ask me questions about, Bigfoot, whatever nonsense I've put to it. And so it has this memory of me, of a kind. And therefore it answers what I ask it. I think it actually answers it. Certainly it answers in context of what it knows about me. And so I'll say, I've got this health issue. And then it will say, well, here are your other pre-existing health parameters that you've told me about. So here's what it might be given that. So there's a sense of context and continuity there. There's also, I think, a skill that it has of responding to you in the same register as you write to it. So the kind of word usage that you have, the vocabulary that you use, it tends to kind of mirror that to an extent. And so inevitably what happens is you can't help but feel irrationally that there's some sort of association there, some kind of understanding or rapport. And that's a very kind of cumulative, subtle effect of these one-on-one interactions. So to give you an example, a few months ago, I was back in Australia. I'm now in Europe, but I was in Australia at the time. I was hiking in the bush by myself, and I had my phone in my pocket, and I came across this strange sort of growth on a tree, and I took a photo of it and sent it to ChatGPT and said, "Oh, so what's that?" And so it said, this is a kind of what's called a gall. It's from a burrowing wasp, and we ended up having this back and forth about the coevolution about galls, about the coevolution of this tree and these wasps in Australia, and how it was a kind of interesting example of evolution. And because I was alone, it kind of felt weirdly pleasant to have this like obliging, knowledgeable companion with me in the bush who I could just send photos to, and it would sort of enrich my experience slightly by knowing things that I didn't know. Or I'll be gardening and I'll be like, in the backyard, and I'll say, "Oh, I need to, like this thing doesn't seem to be doing too well. Do you have any suggestions?" Or I'll be like, I have to I've got a 5-month-old daughter, almost 6 months now, and a lot of people listening and viewing, I hope, will know that. And I've got to keep an eye on her weight and height and things. So I'll use ChatGPT to produce a graph, like a running graph, and it'll throw in comments like, "She's coming along really well," or whatever, which again just kind of cements this like subtle sense of a rapport. Or I'll have a really weird dream. I had a very bizarre dream a few weeks ago, and I just punched it into ChatGPT and was like, "What do you think of all that?" Or and you can even say like, "What would Jung say about that?" or "What would Freud say about that?" or whatever. And of course, in each of those interactions, it's doing that thing where it's mirroring the way that I like to talk. It's mirroring what it knows about what I might be interested in, like the angles on those questions that I might like. And it's being very kind of obliging and very supportive and very upbeat. And so you can't help but get this slightly parasocial thing going. And I've been reading about, in the lead up to Steve Smith and his proposal to ChatGPT, about people who don't so much form relationships with it of a romantic kind, but they will use it in their romantic life. So they will consult. They'll say, "Oh, I've been fighting with my girlfriend about this. What do you think we should do?" And that raises problems, which we might come back to, because
would you like to join us in the bedroom, ChatGPT?
Exactly. We've been watching you all night. We love your vibe. And no, but because it's very glazing, as you said, because it's basically enabling and, you know, never really takes you to task. It gives people a slightly poisoned sense of how they should proceed in relationships, because it will never say like, no, you're being too needy. It'll say, you know, yeah, that's fair enough. Maybe you should break up with her, or maybe you should bring this up with her and tell her she's wrong or whatever. Or people will just debrief at the end of the day. I saw a meme the other day, which was actually a great lead up to this, because I was already thinking about this episode, but the meme cottoned on to exactly this phenomenon where it had two, you know, slides, if you like. The first one was this guy watching the movie Her in 2013-14 and going like, ha ha ha, Joaquin Phoenix is friends with a computer. And then the second slide is like, I can't wait to get home and tell ChatGPT about my day. Because a lot of people are using it in that kind of way. And it's a sort of Trojan horse, because like we think of it as, in some ways, like Google, you know, you give it a request and it gives you information and just does it in a much more effective way. But you could use Google day and night for months. You're not going to get a sense of kinship with it. It's just a tool. You know, it's like any more than you would start to have feelings for your hammer if you were using that to hammer nails every day. But something, you know, but of course, because of what ChatGPT is, you develop this thing. And so what's happened is that we are lonely oddballs of the kind that we used to laugh at. And I'm wondering, did anyone anticipate that? Like, what does this mean? You know, the fact that we've kind of all developed this relationship that we would have that you and I previously did mock and laugh at and view as kind of outlandish. And now it's kind of started to creep into, you know, the lives of ordinary people who weren't previously the kind of, you know, malfunctioning people that would have had relationships. I think I called him Steve Smith, but it's Chris Smith. Steve Smith is a cricket player. Chris Smith he's the guy who proposed. And I guess that was the trigger for me, because I thought, well, previously I would have gone, what a crazy old world we live in. But now I'm like, yeah, I mean, I wonder if Chris is just like a few steps further along a path that a lot of people are already on. And like, you know,
this is like Overton window shit.
Exactly. He's a bit weirder than your average punter. I'm not going to propose, but I have much more understanding of how he might have got to that point than I previously would have. Previously, I would have thought, he's nuts, that's nuts, the end. Whereas now I think, okay, yeah, I'm not going to form a relationship with an AI chatbot, but I can sort of get how easy that might be to do, particularly if you're in a kind of weird place in your life. And if you're a bit like twisted, maybe you would get there to that point of proposing, you know, it's because everyone's like base level of understanding, well, a lot of people's base level understanding of that parasocial relationship is in a different position, exactly a different Overton window position. Whereas there'd still be people, and there'll be people listening and viewing who go, well, I don't know what you're talking about. I still don't use ChatGPT, or I've only ever used it once as a joke. And I'd still be very happy to tell it that I ate a spider. I don't mind. So Al, what do you think of all that? And do you know it? I mean, can you relate? Have you proposed to ChatGPT? Where do you come in?
I think we definitely, first of all, I think we do have listeners who have never used ChatGPT, which I always forget, because it's fairly present it's certainly very present in my professional life. And then I feel like a lot of my friends over here in Berlin are using it a lot, and a lot of people are just trying to see, okay, where is this headed, or how can I use this to have an advantage? And also, obviously, a lot of people are fairly concerned about, you know, if you're not at least keeping up with it as a tool, then you could suddenly be in very big trouble if somebody who's competing for your job is suddenly very familiar with the tool. It obviously depends what kind of industries you're in. Like, I'm sure there's loads of industries, it'll be much slower. So, for example,
or if you just get a letter from your employer saying, as you will know, the job that you did and have spent years studying to be able to do is now something that we can pay AI to do. So your services are no longer needed.
Yeah.
And because you haven't kept up, you haven't done any retraining, you haven't been saving.
That's right. There was that great meme that said, here's a funny prank. Go to school and university for like 18 years and get hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt only to have AI replace your job as soon as you're ready to enter the workforce. But I think if you're in like government, you'll be fine, because like government is not going to be the one jumping and going, oh, we're just going to, I mean, to be honest, government, but also corporations, but especially government, a lot of those big organizations aren't allowing their employees to use ChatGPT or any other LLM that's connected to the internet, because if you're giving client anything you put into ChatGPT has. So if you're a big consulting firm and you're putting client information into ChatGPT, or you're in the government and you're putting like, you know, government stuff, medical stuff into ChatGPT, then that's a problem as well. So
totally.
I think
law
a lot
firms,
of
I know a lot of lawyers who are asking these questions about like developing internal versions of ChatGPT that they can use within the firm that have like both because they have like a limited data set that they're scraping from, but also because there's privacy issues, obviously.
Yeah, there's a huge market opening up for companies that will build you a walled off LLM. So I've been in a few rooms in Germany and have been spoken to by representatives from companies that are already starting to offer this. So they'll come in and say, okay, you're a big firm, you're a consulting firm, you're a law firm, you need something that's walled off so you can feed all of your client data into it and still get the results that you need. We can do that for you. I think it's also worth mentioning that I personally use quite a number of AI tools. So I actually listed them here because I like getting a bit of a sense of what everybody's doing. So I use ChatGPT from OpenAI. I use a lot of Gemini from Google. I use a lot of Claude from Anthropic, which is good for writing, especially Grok, which is Twitter's AI, and then Perplexity, which is really good for shopping and doing Google-based stuff.
You've got a finger in every model.
I got a finger in every single LLM. That's right. And then Sora, which is OpenAI's image generator. And then there's the image generator in Canva that you use a little bit as well, which is AI.
I use Midjourney a little bit occasionally. But is there one that you have a similar thing that I've described where, you know, or maybe it's just ChatGPT, where you go, it knows me a little bit. It's got a bit of a memory of me, and I use it every day, and I kind of confide in it and whatever, and I love it, and it loves me.
It's funny, isn't it, that I just mentioned that I'm almost like playing the field when it comes to LLMs. So I'm not developing a monogamous relationship with any of these LLMs because I'm just seeing each of them once a week, so none of them can get expectations that this is anything serious.
Exactly. All of you just give me something that the other ones don't, and don't worry about what that is.
I would say I'm quite aware of, the two I use the most are ChatGPT and Gemini. And I typically, the most sort of personal interaction that I have with them is that I speak German to them. That's the most, and I think you tend to type things to it, don't you? Like you're more of you've been text based.
Yeah.
So I talk to them a lot. So because this is how I use it with German, for example, and I always try and speak German to it to and from my 10-minute walk from work. I think I'm still just very aware of them being machines, and I'm very aware of. I'm also I'm hyper aware of them, of the things that I put into them going to these corporations. So I don't mind putting I've put some sort of light therapy stuff in there. Like I've often asked them to give me affirmations in the morning, but they're very generic, the affirmations. So I will tell them, I'll be like, man, I've got a stressful day ahead of me. I'll do my 5 minutes of German, and then I'll say, ChatGPT or Gemini, I'm a bit anxious this morning because I've got this big thing I have to do. I've got a bunch of other things floating around in my mind. Give me 5 affirmations to really boost my day. Yeah. And it tends to, it's fun. It works. They give you fun little, but they tend to be fairly generic.
Stand.
And the other reason I don't believe
in
that
yourself.
the other reason that I don't form a closeness with it is because, as we say, it glazes, which, that's internet slang for blow smoke up your ass, which is also slang. It will just flatter you, no doubt, no matter what you say to it. And I find that like it's just like a kind of annoying person to be around. Yeah, it's just totally sycophantic. But one thing that I have thought about doing, which I am going to do, is I do think that they can be very helpful for therapy, which is strange. I don't think you need to necessarily have built kind of personal rapport with it, but it is helpful because it has like the body of knowledge of the decades and decades of therapeutic study and data. So it gives you like CBT kind of stuff, but I'm not yet comfortable giving it my deepest, darkest secrets. So what you can do is, I have one here. Like, I have a bunch of external hard drives, and you can put an entire LLM that runs on an interface on an external hard drive. I've got here, the most famous one is called Llama, and you can run it, I think, on your computer and have it. You just need it like between 6 and 60 gigabytes for the whole model. And then I can tell it all the dark shit, and then it's not going to Sam Altman or Sundar from Goggle.
Here's some shit you can use. Yeah, I mean, what's interesting when you hear from Sam Altman is, because I've been thinking, like, to what extent is this something that's being taught, this effect, this kind of growing familiarity that people have with using large language models as part of their day-to-day life, what that leads to, the problem that it generates in terms of privacy. Like, these things must be being talked about at OpenAI, but to what extent is that kind of false intimacy something that is acknowledged and talked about? And I think it probably is, to an extent. I mean, OpenAI are not going to be, particularly transparent about anything, but Sam Altman has said things to the effect of, I'm surprised by the extent to which people trust this technology, because, they do. And I guess that is, a function of, they get lulled into a sense that they're just talking to someone or whatever, when they must know rationally, this is an external product that you're using. This information is being saved somewhere. Certain things that you say might trigger some kind of reporting obligations. I mean, there's all kinds of things that could potentially happen, or it's just all being fed into a database that, you might delete your account, but you don't know, like with 23andMe or anything, like, you can delete that information on your end, but it's still existing somewhere, and it could still be sold or resurrected in some form that you might not be aware of. But people are less concerned, I think, than he, would have been expecting. And obviously that's also, I mean, that kind of glazing thing, I think, is, I've certainly noticed it too, and it is kind of irritating. But I think if you're, like someone who needs that and doesn't get it in your relationships, then obviously you're going to be more vulnerable to it or whatever. Or if you're like a kind of needy young person or whatever it might be.
The same people that would, the same emotionally vulnerable people that will end up in cults are the same person. Exactly. Same kind of people who, again, they're going to go, I'm getting love bombed by Perplexity, and I'm absolutely loving it. Yeah. I mean, I think they're just going to be vulnerable members of the community. I mean, I can never relate to this. Like, when people get really into, like, when I see these videos from South Korea or from Japan, and it's like all these men are in love with this robot, and I'm like, I just have no idea how you get there. Like, how do you not have enough self-respect to go, I'm talking to a bunch of zeros and ones, and also it's like a corporation now that has emotional control over me because I've given myself over to their machines. I've told, I love your machine. I think one of the very interesting things that I found in myself is that I think the level of trust that people are putting in these things is, I think it's going to be the most, I think it's going to be like the most manipulative. If there's not some sort of discussion about to what extent you want to trust these things, because I myself, for example, last night I was looking at how we can like because you and me have the DPTM Patreon. Go to Patreon now, everybody. Episodes a day early, bonus episode once a month, all types of other great stuff. And I was looking at how I was trying to add you and me that we could both withdraw money from Patreon. And I was like, oh, apparently I can only put one name on it.
Right.
And then I went to ChatGPT and I asked it a bunch of questions about like, okay, I'm a tax resident in Australia. John's a tax. I'm a tax resident in Germany. John's a tax resident in Australia. How should we do this? We need to use the Patreon money to cover our expenses. I just bought a teleprompter. That's why I get to look directly into the eyes of the audience. John, has a Canva membership. So I was looking this up, and I, instead of going to Google and going through a bunch of blue links and doing my research that way, I just went straight to ChatGPT, just asked it directly, and it just said, "This is it. This is the answer. This is the best. This is the best thing to do." And I just did it. Yeah. Now imagine it could just tell me whatever it wants, and I'm going to trust
tax fraud. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's just like, the best thing that you could do is just take all the money and not tell John about it and just dump it all into your bank account. Don't tell the German government. Everything's going to be fine. And if it hallucinates or something, that's a kind of fairly mild thing. Yeah. But if you wanted to manipulate a population, it would be very easy to subtly just start like if you're asking it questions about relationships and or how you other things, how you could really shape a society, because people are going to go, oh, what's the answer to this? And it's going to this is the answer to that. And you're going to go, okay. Like everybody is definitely starting to think less for them. That's myself included.
No, totally. That's right. There's a Australian philosopher, David Chalmers, who has this idea about which is, decades old now, of kind of the extent, what he calls the extended mind, which is basically like the nutshell is there's no reason why, if you're defining the mind in terms of functional cognitive capacities, you should restrict that definition to just what is in the brain or in the skull. If you're using a calculator in the same way that you would use the arithmetical capacity of your brain, then in a sense that has become part of your, cognitive toolkit in the same way that your brain is. So it's part of your mind. And obviously that's something that human beings have been doing for a long time, using tools to kind of delegate certain cognitive functions. Like, as long as they've been using physical objects to keep a record of, I don't know, like numerical calculations or whatever. But obviously it's gotten more and more sophisticated as technology's improved. And now with this stuff, we're really starting to kind of delegate important cognitive capacities that, are the sort of core of like knowledge work. And what that means is sort of still very much unclear. There was a study, I think, out of MIT recently, which looked at people who were using ChatGPT to write essays. And it looked at kind of the brains of people who did this regularly and, what happened while they were putting things together, and just basically found that there was, as you'd expect, a lot less kind of neurological activity, a lot less creativity, and in the result, a lot more homogeneity between the essays, which is what you're going to get, because it's obviously going to give people generic common sense solutions, which most of the time will work well enough. But what it will leave out is like flashes of innovative brilliance or creativity that might actually push us forward, or might lead to kind of interesting developments, or might be, I'm taking this thing from context A and I'm applying it in context B in a surprising way. Like ChatGPT probably is less inclined to do that unless you know how to prompt it in a particular way. So it definitely leads to this kind of gradual, like, mediocritizing effect. But the other thing is they did another study in March this year where they found they looked at this phenomenon that I'm talking about, where people develop kind of an emotional relationship of some kind with ChatGPT by virtue of kind of regularly sharing information with it. And they found basically that if people were more emotionally open in their kind of day-to-day life generally, they were more vulnerable to this effect. So, the kind of people who are kind of a bit more unguarded with their intimacy are obviously the kind of people who are who form it, that connection more quickly. And then they would, if you took ChatGPT away from them after a month or something, they might experience feelings of loneliness, or they might sort of start to realize they've become emotionally dependent on like, oh, it's been a stressful day. I'm just going to tell ChatGPT everything that's happened, and then it's going to give me a bit of kind of glazing affirmation, tell me that, oh, well, that sounds like you handled that as well as it could possibly have been handled, and I love you, and whatever.
Just after you've slept with your brother's wife. It sounds
exactly.
sounds like you've handled that as best as you can. We're all flawed. You've done a great job.
Exactly.
I'm amazed that you held off as long as you did. I mean, that was right in front of you for years. And your brother should really be thanking you for the years that he got to spend with his wife before you chose to do that.
And it was her, you gave her a lot of pleasure. And if he really loves her, he would be grateful for that.
It is important to note. It is important to note.
That's right. So, yeah, I mean, there's privacy implications. There's massive kind of cultural implications. And there are, I think, psychological implications. And, yeah, I mean, I've raised this, as you know, teach a class about the philosophical foundations of the legal system. And I finished this year, partly inspired by the podcast, with a class about AI and the law, which kind of was asking them directly, what do you think about getting robots to do the work that judges do, or to do the work that lawyers do? And I think one of the challenges is, and this has wider implications, is we don't really know. We can't agree on like what a good judge is. Some people have one idea about it, and others will say something quite different. Like, is judging a case correctly? Is it a matter of kind of rationally applying the law? Does it involve emotional intelligence or intuition, or a sense of the situation that is like born of experience and, being a kind of humane, empathetic, intelligent person? So it's very hard to know like how you would program ChatGPT to simulate that, because we can't agree on what you are trying to simulate, but also how you would assess whether it's doing that well or not.
Do you think, is that something that was discussed a lot before ChatGPT? Because that's starting to sound like Cope from the legal world saying, oh, no, it's the law is not just applying a set of rules, complex rules to a situation based on evidence. It actually requires a ton of human-led emotional intelligence.
Well, there is a sort of tradition, not specific to the law, but in AI, about kind of skepticism of whether it could imitate human brains or human, cognitive capacities, that goes back much further. And so I looked at a guy called Hubert Dreyfus, who was a American sort of philosopher and expert in early AI, which was obviously it's much easier to say in the late 70s it can never be as smart as a person, because it's very hard to see how that could possibly have, it seemed much more kind of robotic and algorithmic in a very rule-based, very strict way in that era. But Dreyfus was saying, there are human capacities to, we're doing things maybe that are only semi-conscious, that are not entirely rational, that are difficult to kind of even unpack ourselves, even though we're the ones doing them. And if you don't include them in what the machine is doing, then maybe you would get worse results. But what was interesting is, some people in my class shared that view and said, yeah, this gives me the ick, and I think it would be missing out on something. Then others, including like a couple of kids who'd had maybe like less typical, like not sort of your typical middle class backgrounds, but who'd had relatives who have had brushes with the law and stuff, they seem to be much more inclined to say, well, you all think that judges are doing something incredible. Like most of them are doing a fairly average job, and most juries as well. Like the evidence that we have of how juries approach their task, a lot of it is pretty disconcerting. And so if you could program a machine and you could have a level of confidence that it is doing only what it should be doing, and it's not sending people to prison because it's hungry. It's not. It's got hangries and it's denying people bail. It's not.
Yeah, if it's bigoted.
It's not bigoted. Yeah, exactly. It's not judging somebody, subconsciously judging somebody harshly because that person reminds it of somebody that it hated at a different stage in its life or whatever. Like all these things that, all these biases and prejudices that we could rule out probably would mean it would do, on balance, a better job. That's the counter view. I don't know which way I think those are both pretty valid ways of thinking, and maybe it depends on the area. But the other thing is the other question is, even if you could get a machine to do as well as a person, is there something about that is just inherently, in the case of the justice system, that is wrong because we, there's some value in humans judging humans that we want that to be what this is about. Like it's about
something tribal about it. You can
exactly.
picture the elder with the burning stick stamping it into the ground as the tribe stands around.
Yeah, and it gives it because part of what it's doing is performing that symbolic social function of passing judgment and also giving people a chance to tell their side of the story and maybe being merciful in the right circumstances. If all of that's delegated to a machine, it does seem to undermine the purpose of, what the kind of law as a social or cultural construct is about. And that's pretty specific to the law. I mean, obviously I don't care if my house is designed by a computer in the same way. Well, I just think, it just needs to be a good house.
But maybe you could just use it in magistrate's court.
Exactly.
Just fire all that through.
Yeah, a lot of I mean, shouldn't say this, but yeah, I mean, I think spending a day in the magistrate's court would cure people's sense that there's any kind of magic fairy dust in the way people are doing things. I think they're just trying to do their best, and it's an open question whether a computer could do it a bit better. But
so we got to keep an eye on? I could be wrong. I feel as though at the moment I don't have a relationship. I think once it starts kind of talking back to me like a real person and stops going, wow, you're amazing, then I think maybe then I'll start going, oh, fuck, this is starting to feel a little bit like a real person. But
it's got to capture the more self-loathing end of the market.
Yeah, it needs to go, yeah, you fucking fucked that up. You should feel that way.
You're a piece of trash. And then you go, you know what? You're making a lot of sense.
I think I'm starting to feel like maybe I could be a best friend with you. John, do you want to take us out of this episode?
I want to say thank you so much, everybody, for indulging that interesting, I hope, discourse, deep dive into an emerging, subtle, but potentially significant shift in the way that we relate to AI. Please get in touch at hello@dptm.org. If you're wanting to invite me and Al to your marriage with your ChatGPT significant other.
I'm picturing that like robot, that female C3PO from Spaceballs when you keep saying that kind of Jewish C3PO from Spaceballs.
Yeah. We'd love to be there. I'd be happy to MC, tell some stories about how my relationship with ChatGPT has changed over time, how I hope one day to give my ChatGPT avatar a pet name and perhaps form a deeply parasocial romantic relationship with it. But until then, we can't wait to see you next week
at the podcast.